request to be excused. Friday, February 23rd, 2024 at 5 p.m. Oregon School Boards Association OSBA Board of Directors special meeting is called to order. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Sami Al-Abdrabba. I am OSBA president, and I want to welcome you all for being here at this meeting. The first item on the agenda is a roll call. And a roll call will be taken. Board members, please say aye if are present, if you are available. Board member Craig Albright is not here. Director Jeffrey Crapper is excused. President-elect Chris Cronin.
Present.
And Director Jackie Crook. Director Jackie Crook, welcome. Your presence. Director Jackie Crook.
Yes.
Temporary till my thing start.
Just got on. Thanks, Chris, for the heads up. I was just lounging.
Welcome. Director Lori Denzuka is not here. Director Katrina Dowdy.
Present.
Director Neelam Gupta is not here. Director Linda Hamilton.
Here.
Director Chris Howitt.
Here.
Director Tristan Arvin.
Present.
Director Greg Kentz.
Here.
Director Christy Kadaki.
Here.
Directors Steve Lowell and is excused. Immediate past president Sonny McKenzie is excused. Director Alonso Oliveros.
Present.
Director Chrissy Reeds is excused. Director Clyde Rood.
Here.
Director Nicole Shaw. Director Nicole Shaw.
I'm here.
And Vice President Emily Smith is excused. Director Nancy Thomas is absent. And Director Glenn
Sounds like doctor.
So sorry, Director Glenn Watker, is that correct?
Wachter sounds like doctor. I'm here, present. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And Secretary Treasurer Don Watson.
Here.
And ex officios for the record, President Samuel Abdrabbo is here. Will Cahill.
Here.
Is here. Craig Hawkins. I believe we do have Krista Parent now as the new ex officio. Is that correct? Is excused. And Guadalupe Martinez Zapata. Is not here, and Kim Morgan is not here. A roll call has been taken and a quorum is present. Since there is a quorum, the meeting will proceed with business of approving the agenda. The president would like to entertain a motion to approve an agenda of the meeting. President-elect Chris Cronin.
Mr. President, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll
Chris
second.
Howitt, second.
I think the first second came from Greg Kentz, if I'm not mistaken. And is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing there's no discussion on the motion, is there any objection on the motion to approve the agenda as presented? Seeing there's no objection on the motion passes unanimously. With that, I want to welcome you all and thank you all for being here in this training or attending or watching the recording of this training. Today, the purpose of this professional development opportunity for all of us as board members, newly appointed or elected, or those who have been serving for a while, to be on the same page in terms of understanding the resources, the services, and the documents that are crucial for our organization. So with that, I want to thank you for being here and for your commitment on one of the most important goals that OSBA board set for itself, which is onboarding its board members. With that, I would like to hand it over to the next speaker, Linnell Trissel, the executive assistant, regarding accessing OSBA web portal and OSBA website resources. And the links to that also are available for you on the agenda. Linnell, take it away.
Well, I tested this and it was working just fine. And now it is not. My apologies.
No
Well, now
worries.
while you get that going, I can just really quickly state what you would ask me to, which is that for the meeting today, this is a training, and so we are going to try to get through a lot of content. So it's going to feel a little bit like a sit and get. But just wanted to let you all know that the chat is available. You can put your questions in the chat. And we will do our best to either address them during that time or collect them if we're starting to run out of time and get back to you all with the questions. But there's a lot of content to cover. And a lot of it is just showing you where all of the resources are. So if you think in terms of how we used to do this with a sit down with a binder and someone would go through it with you and show you where all of the resources and everything that you could access. We're doing that on the virtual platform so that you all know where you can go back and reference and find materials and resources to be able to support you in your work, in addition to some specific training that you'll have later.
And with that, the first resource that you're going to want to know well is the member portal. You can access it from the OSBA website. It is this little icon up here that says My OSBA Login. It will take you to the login page. You'll use your OSBA, whatever address your OSBA email comes in on, and that login. Your resources are going to be under My Resources, My Association. The main resources that you'll want to look at first is the board resources. Here you have links to the bylaws, the policy manual, the operating agreements, the governance regions, board map, other resources like, okay, so the roster is only updated once a year, but I'll show you where you can find more updated information. The calendar of events, the vision, mission, goals, the call to equity, all of your other supporting. And then down here at the bottom of the page, we have all of your guidelines and processes. The other place that you will need to know is in My Resources, My Association, your board list. Will be an updated list, and your email or your region, which is also not working because I think my internet is flagging, which is fun. Okay, so I may have to come back to this at the end of the presentation. So the second place of your resources is going to be on your OSBA webpage. It'll be under the About tab. You guys have a Board of Directors webpage. In this web page, you'll be able to access your meeting minutes and your operating agreements, a list of all of your current officers and board members And down at the bottom is the roles and responsibilities for all of your officers and your board members, and a current calendar of events. It has instructions on how to become a board member, your terms of office. Also on the About tab, you have links to both the caucuses. So the Color Caucus has a web page. The Rural Caucus has a web page. And the Advisory Committee has a web page. The Governance Information web page has links to all of your governance documents. So your vision, mission, goals, your bylaws, your policies, your governance map, your call to equity, your meeting minutes, and your resolutions. And then on your elections page, we'll have all of your current election center information on it. I will have to come back to the portal to show you your other, the board list and the Email My Region tool. But with that, that is your main resources and where they're located. If you'll notice in your agenda, each of these items have been linked, and you can access from your agenda links to both the portal and the website resources. So thank you.
Thank you, Linnell, and appreciate your work on that, and looking forward to coming back to it. The next thing we would like to introduce is our phenomenal departments who are doing the work on the ground. We will be having 5 minutes each of them, board development, communication services, legal services, legislative services, operations and finance, PACE administration, and policy services, the components that makes OSBA what it is, serving its members in different capacities. So with that, I would like to, first of all, really thank all the directors for being here on a late Friday, a sunny Friday that is. I appreciate you spending the time to share the work that you do. And I believe Emily will be doing introductions to each department.
We'll just go through and have them introduce themselves. I did just want to say that this is very high level. Later in the year, we'll do more of an in-depth roundtable where you can sit down and ask questions and listen. But we just wanted to take the opportunity with so many newer board members that you can put a name to a face in the department. And again, we'll show you where you can find their resources within their department, but an opportunity to just sort of get to meet each one of our directors that are leading our teams. So with that, I will turn it over to board development, and then we can just go down the list.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm Kristen Miles, and I'm the director of the board development department. We are a department of 4 field staff, including myself, the director, and a senior assistant. As many of you know, we've worked with you. We do board training around the state. We also do webinars. We do virtual trainings. We assist in strategic planning. We do board self-assessment. We do superintendent evaluation. And then our department also does superintendent and executive services or executive searches as well. So pretty much anything that a board needs as far as professional development. We do coaching for board leadership, and we take calls all day long just answering questions from board members and superintendents. So we try and accommodate everybody's needs. And Linnell has directed you to the board development page on the website where you can get information on our professional development services, how you get involved in our Leadership Institute, where you can earn credits and get what we call medals for your learning, resources, and then more information on some services we provide for charter schools and authorizers. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Alex Pulaski, and I've been OSBA's communications director since 2016. I actually started OSBA 11 years ago today, so it's my work birthday. And our team consists of myself and Jake Arnold, who writes education news stories, Gina Hutchinson, who's our graphic designer and also assists with some marketing. Ika Collins, who's our senior administrative specialist, and we also contract with Lionel Leonard to handle our social media accounts, which are on Facebook, X, which you may know as Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We'd love to see you engaging with us there. Our team mission is supporting the OSBA board's longstanding goal of OSBA being the public education communications leader here in Oregon. And you'll see some examples on the website here, such as legislative highlights, which we work very closely with the leg team on, and our news stories. We have a lot of interactions every week with the different teams, and that's our opportunity to really support the great work that they do on behalf of members. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Looks like I'm next. My name is Michael Miller. I'm the interim director of the legal department. And it looks like there's our legal services page now that Linnell has pulled up. The legal department consists of 7 attorneys and 2 paralegals. And we assist members on a daily basis with legal issues ranging from hiring to firing and kind of everything in between, from public records requests to issues with students and playground fights. You name it. And we are helping our districts kind of work through those potential legal issues. We also defend PACE members against claims that are brought both before courts, either state and federal courts, and in front of administrative agencies. And then finally, we provide presentations and trainings to members at districts and at conferences across the state. So we're also busy out there trying to train and provide our members with the most up-to-date legal information to, again, kind of help them work their way through some of these tricky issues that they face on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Hey, everybody. Lori Sattenspiel in the Legislative Services. I'm in my 18th year. A lot of you have worked with us already in the Legislative Services Department. What do? We advocate, yay, on behalf of the association and the members of the association. We lobby at the state legislature. We lobby at the executive level, agencies, and federal level. Our team, 2.5 people. Efren Zamudio is our legislative specialist, and we have Linnell halftime. So she's still the glue that keeps this department working well. We pursue the OSBA's legislative priorities, and I will say that that is year-round work. Advocacy has changed. It used to be work during the long session, then we'd have time off. And no, we didn't just stay at home and eat bonbons. We have year-round work groups and task forces to keep legislative stuff moving along. Again, our priorities like funding. Let's see. We protect the Student Success Act that we passed in 2019. There's a lot of people that see that as the piggy bank for the legislature. We want to keep our territorial hands on that Student Success Act. We train and work on expanding the role of our Legislative Policy Committee, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. We collaborate with the 2 caucuses, and we provide direct services to the membership. We do conferences. We work with the school business officials, go to their conference, OAESD, attend PACE meetings. And one of the last things that we do that causes this year-round activity, we interact with the various task forces, as I mentioned, and we're on the Oregon Department of Education's Rules Advisory Committee. We're on the department's Audit Committee, Cybersecurity, Seismic Advisory Committee, the Oregon Capital Matching Grant. So we are very active and will continue to be as we continue to advocate on behalf of all students. Thank you.
So Chris Davidson, your Chief Operations Officer, in charge of finance and operations. Much like your school districts, pretty much your district office functions happen in my office. So we do obviously the budgets. We manage the investment portfolios both for PACE and for OSBA. pay the bills, do the payroll, all that fun stuff. We moved events under our umbrella this year when we got a new event person with Sharice. So Sharice takes care of working with board development and communications on things like annual convention, summer board, and bonds and ballots. We also have the IT department, which takes care of all the needs of the employees from an IT perspective. And then we also are in charge of the facilities, both the local government center where our offices are housed, as well as our parking lots and rental properties and cottages. So that's kind of everything that happens in my world. Next.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I'm Dave Harvey. I'm the Director of PACE Administration. I seems how the rest of my colleagues didn't take all their time. I'll go ahead and take the rest of their time. So I, get a couple laughs. That's great. Thanks, guys. So if you didn't know, if you look at the PACE there, it's property and casualty for coverage for education. There's a double C in our logo there, and that's what that stands for. PACE is a subsidiary kind of OSBA. We're in partnership with Special Districts Association of Oregon. And if you don't know what they are, they're the special districts that do like cemeteries, water districts, fire districts. So they do similar activities with their boards and their boards all around the state of Oregon, like OSBA does. So there was some synergy there and it's a lot of cost savings. So what we did is we partnered with them back in 2005, 2006 to form the trust, the PACE Trust. And so what that does is it saves a little over $1 million a year in administrative fees for all of our members, which is a really good thing. So SDAO does all the claims in-house, all of the underwriting, which is the coverage document, and the risk management. Their folks are out in the field roaming around, not only just PACE folks, but also those districts I talked about. So when I talked about the savings, when they're in a community like a John Day, they're also visiting all of their special districts at the same time. So there's not there's not two people going out at one time. That's where that savings really comes in at. On the OSBA side, we have the legal services, as Michael talked about, helping our members with their pre-loss and a lot of other issues that they may have. Community crisis communication, that Alex, our legislatively, that's Lori, things that are happening at the Capitol that may affect PACE members in that way. We also have the, as Chris mentioned, we have the investment portfolio on the PACE side. It's different from the OSBA side, and I may be missing one, but that's what we do on that side there. PACE is governed by a 9-member board. Those board members are appointed by you as the OSBA board members. We bring them from the board to you, like we're going to do in March. You appoint them to the board, and they're really superintendent, a lot of business managers, because PACE is an operational entity, for our members out there, and which, excuse me. So one of those board members is here tonight, and that's Dawn Watson. So there's always going to be a OSBA board member on the PACE board. She does not have term limits on the PACE board. All the other ones, PACE board do have term limits of 3-year stints, which so 9 years total if they so choose. And then going from there, we take care of their general liability, their property, which includes crime and auto, all of that. And just as a little fun fact, we insure about $26 billion in property across the state. So that helpfully takes that off the plate of the worries of districts and for any, our last storm that we had about 46 entities, 126 buildings, and about 15 million in losses. So that's something that PACE takes care of for them. Yeah, you have your deductible. PACE takes care of a layer, and then we have reinsurance to take care of the rest of that. So it's really important that you understand that the breadth and scope of our business that we do for the state of Oregon, because everybody's a member in the state. All 17 community colleges, all the ESDs, about 80 charter schools, and all the K-12 schools except for Portland, Beaverton, and Salem. They self-insure. Now, it's not that they can't be in the pool. They can be, and they have requested some quotes from us, but they're not in the pool at this point in time. So, our goal is to provide specific coverage to educational entities. We're not an insurance company. We're not a big box company. We don't go for profits. The members own the pool, right? So the money that we bring in and the money that we put out for claims is all member. They self-insure each other. That's what you all are a part of there. So the services that we provide help members mitigate costs. Michael talked about that. They talk about the pre-loss. They're there to help hopefully lower any type of claims or lawsuits, that type of thing. We have a lot of trainings that we do at conferences. legal consultations, as I talked about. But they're at no cost. All of our trainings that we do are at no cost. It's part of their contribution to the pool that they pay for every year. So, you know, they all have access to all of our programs and including the risk management, the legal, the communication, the legislative, and the underwriting. So if you have questions for me, we'll do it another time. You can go through Emily and ask that, and I'm happy to help you, though. Thank you for the time tonight.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Spencer Lewis. I'm the Director of Policy Services here at OSBA. I've got a team of 5. We've got myself, and then we have Rick Stuckey and Leslie Fisher, both of which have been with OSBA for 15 years, which is a great resource internally and externally. And then we also have Colleen Allen and Jean Chapizzi, who actually came in the last 5 or 6 years from school districts. So great resources for us. Our purpose is to help school districts, boards, superintendents, board secretaries keep their policies up to date. And that we do that in a number of ways. One, we do rewrites with districts if they need, if your policies are out of date. Sometimes it's best just to bring us in and go through policy by policy and get those updated. We also do upkeep services. We do web hosting. And one exciting thing, we are working with Bryce and Chris's department to update our web hosting so that it is more accessible. And we have a meeting next week to review the prototype. So we're really excited about being able to move forward with that. But that's one of the services that we provide to almost 200 member organizations within OSBA. We do work really, really closely with board secretaries. And one thing that Colleen and Jean do extremely well is when there's a new board secretary that has no idea about policy, they reach out, they meet with them and help explain, you know, what the procedures are, how things can work, and really help them get up to speed so that they can assist their board as things move forward. We also work really closely with superintendents. We get a lot of questions from superintendents, from board members, from board secretaries, sometimes policy related, sometimes not so much, but we work with them to get those questions answered to help. We also work with other agencies and other entities in the state. We regularly communicate with ODE, OHA, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. There's a group of school librarians that we've actually been meeting with for about a year now on book challenges and what some new procedures might look like there. Also, you know, the school nurses, some IT professionals. So we really work across the board with different groups to really try to help identify what the needs are, and then if policy is the best place to address those needs, you know, jump in and figure out what we can do there. A few times a year, we release a policy update. That's probably when my name is cursed more than any other, you know, during the year that, you know, we'll send out a big policy update with, you know, anywhere from 5 to 30 policies that need updated in the district. And so then we work with board secretaries and superintendents to get those up to date for the board. Once the board adopts, if you have web hosting or something, then we go through and we update there. So, but that's what we do. We also work really, really closely with other departments here at OSBA. I've been in policy, I've been in board development, I've been in legal. I was kind of on my own for a little while. So I work a lot and we just answer questions. We work together. We work with Lori really closely during the legislative session. We work with legal to make sure that we're consistent and that policy is supporting the best practices that they're advising, that they're encouraging. So that's it from policy.
Thank you very much, team. I want to say really grateful to hear from you, Kristen, Alex, Michael, Lori, Chris, Dave, and Spencer. The work that you do on behalf of 545,000 students in K-12 schools and all community colleges, ESDs, and sponsored public charters is a work that is phenomenal, helping kids, helping the educators who are supporting them. For fellow board members, please share with me the appreciation of the work that they do. And as board members in our regions and caucuses, our role as well is being ambassadors for the good work that happens in those departments. and sharing how they are a great resource. Since I joined my Corvallis School Board in 2017, there are multiple stories that I know of from my own local district, from the region, and across Oregon that I always celebrate from each department, how they have helped, advocated, and also worked with partners in the legislature and other stakeholders to advocate for the best interest of our students and public schools. So thank you very much. Emily and Haley, would you like to add anything else?
No, I just wanted to echo that. I think hopefully the takeaway here is that we have a really incredibly smart team that does a lot of work to support you all and all of our school boards across the state. And so, like I mentioned, it was a short preview, but there will be more. And our whole team is also just available. If you have specific questions or that you are wondering about and want to follow up or learn more, please feel free to reach out to do that. I do have one change in the agenda. Linnell figured out a workaround to be able to show you all, because this is really important so that you can communicate with the regions that you represent. It's probably one of the most important things for you to know how to do. So if you don't mind, Mr. President, we'll go back to Linnell being able to walk folks through that process.
Sounds good. Not at all.
Oh, there's a gremlin that has taken over my computer. I am so sorry. Okay. There. Whew. Okay. So if you ever have problems accessing any of your resources on the portal, please email me and we will work together to be able to get you access to your resources. So again, this is under my resources, my association, email my region. The email my region tool will send an email on behalf of you to all of the board members within your region. So once you get to the screen, it will automatically come up with your name and the send on behalf of. It'll automatically populate the date. You will want to put in your subject line. I always draft all of my emails in Word, and then I drop them in to the body of the email here. And you can link, and you can do several other formatting type issues here. And then once you hit send email, that email that you have drafted goes out to every board member in your region. And that is the email my region tool.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Linnell. As a reminder, use this tool to communicate with your region and share updates from OSBA board. It is really important for our members to continue to learn about the progress that we do, the services and the achievement that we celebrate. So they continue to support the important work that you just heard of from all of our directors. Thank you very much. So we talked about the services we do and the benefits that reaches to our members. Now, next is to OSBA's vision, mission, values, and board goals, what drives us, the North Compass that helps us continue doing this work with a laser focus on what's best for our students. With that, Emily, I'll hand it back to you.
President. So Linnell is going to take us to show you where you can access this so it's quick and easy and at your fingertips. The board adopted the vision and mission in 2021 that you'll see when she pulls it up here. And the vision is Oregon will provide adequate and stable funding for its public schools, creating every opportunity for strong student success and equitable outcomes. And the mission that was adopted is OSBA is dedicated to providing student success and education equity through advocacy, leadership, and service to Oregon public schools and boards. And I think that when how I work through this, and we've been working with it for the team, and I think the board especially, is when we're thinking of any type of decision that we're making for the organization, or how we're representing the organization, or how we're talking about our work, that we are keeping that vision and mission front and center in that work. And I think something that's really key to this is the student success piece of that. And so really why we are all here and committed and dedicated to this work is that we want to see students succeed, and we want to see every student succeed in Oregon. So really using the vision and mission as kind of our guiding North Star, as Mr. President said, and taking that, the board adopted new strategic focus and goals in January of 2023 to be able to support that mission and vision and goals. And so the work that you've been hearing a lot about over the last year is the work with the Coraggio group and developing our 3 to 5 year business plan to be able to support the organization and ensure that we have stable funding resources, and that we're meeting the needs of our membership, and ensuring that we are staying current and up to date, and being able to ultimately ensure student success for Oregon students. And so if you look at the strategic focus and goals, that's really what we're working off of right now. When we started the work with the Coraggio group, this was the driving focus of how we structured that work with the Coraggio group, and really wanting to focus on the sustainability of the organization, the fiscal health of the organization. So implementing the 3 to 5 year business plan, and really lessening our reliance on our investment principle. So figuring out how we can create other opportunities to increase revenue. Also, if there's efficiencies and ways to lower expenses over the next 5 years, to ensure that we really aren't eating into the principal balance for OSBA for the longevity of the organization. Part of that is also ensuring that the programs and services for goal number 2 that we're providing are current, that they are relevant, that they are, best practices, and that the ways that we're delivering those programs and services are meeting the needs of the organization. So whether that's, looking at how we have trainers throughout the state, or how we develop on-demand training programs, sort of really evaluating how we're doing our delivery of our programs, looking at our conferences and services. So all of that is currently being looked at through the Coraggio work that we're doing. We're really diving into those top priorities around where we can have the biggest impact to hit these goals. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but that is really the framework and structure for how we design the work with the Coraggio group, is to help the board move forward and the organization move forward in hitting these goals for the year. So we'll be coming back to you all in June with our tentative plan around that, and really looking at implementing in the next year, in the 24-25 year.
Thank you, Emily. Next up is OSBA's call for equity. This is the outcome of a process that the board have followed through since 2020 and adopted and concluded in 2022. And I would say not necessarily concluded, because it's a call for ongoing work. And I will hand it over to Kristen Miles, the Director of the Board Development, to speak about OSBA's call for equity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Happy to talk about that. And Linnell, while I'm talking about that, is going to guide you to where that can be found. You're going to go to About, and then you hover over governance information, and then call for equity will be there, so you can find that. I wasn't a director at the time, but I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the call for equity. In September 2020, the board first adopted a goal focused on equity, and that led to the Equity Statement Project. And the board formed a 7-member ad hoc committee about a year later in September 2021 that was staffed by our former Deputy Executive Director, Mary Paulson. A few months later, a final draft of the board's call for equity was adopted by the board then in December 2021. And voting for this call for equity meant that that was approved by board members from across the state, by ESDs. It represented districts both large and small, and urban and rural. As you'll see on the document, the call for equity has 3 pillars, and you can read the details of each pillar in the document itself. But the pillars are, in short, learn and model equitable practices, acknowledge and support the unique character and needs of each district, and amplify the voices of all communities in statewide decision-making. So at the time that this was adopted, the board had a number of points that it used to talk about this, and some of those were that these pillars were meant to reflect a united support of students who were raising their voices against hate speech and racial bias, and that this document also supported local differences and addressed what equity looks like that was unique to each district across the state, and that reflected student and community demographics in the many ways that communities are diverse. And just as Emily was saying, with the document she was talking about, this was also meant to be a bit of a North Star for the board. I can share with you that board development has used this call for equity in developing a series of trainings supported by each pillar in this statement. So this has been a document that's been guiding for us in a number of ways and has supported us in helping boards involve students and staff and community in building and applying equity lenses to their decision making. And our internal staff equity team has also used it as a grounding tool in developing a draft equity lens with the Giving Practice, which is a group that the board has worked with as well. And that's a brief overview of the call for equity. And I encourage you to read that document as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I want to actually take a point of personal privilege to celebrate and thank those who served on that committee and volunteer them to answer any questions about that process. I had the really honor of being in that committee and be witness of a very serious and humbling experience in terms of developing this call for equity and delivering on the needs of each school district, each student. I want to maybe if those who have been on that committee, please raise your virtual hand or visible hand so I can recognize you here and mention your name. So current President-elect Chris Cronin, thank you for your service on that committee. I believe Don Watson was there, if I'm not mistaken. Chris Howitt as well. Thank you for your service on that committee. Anyone else who is remaining on the board who served on that committee? So I want to volunteer those who raise their hands to answer any questions. You may reach out to them individually, reach out to me. And I want to thank the board at the time and thank you for your continuous support of this call for equity. It's so important work and appreciated. Next up is, and please, if you have any questions, feel free to share them over the chat or reach out individually. Next up is the OSBA Board of Directors, OSBA Officers, OSBA Election Process, and OSBA Governance Region. And I've been delegated going through that, so I will go over the first OSBA Board of Directors. You may be very familiar for this, but for those who may be just joining us or watching this in the future, the website produces a page that you can see on the screen that describes our elected representative from OSBA Board of Directors, and they are consisted of 20 regionally elected directors and 2 designated directors on behalf of Oregon School Board members of Color Caucus, and another one from the Color Caucus and the other one from Oregon Rural School Boards of Caucus. An additional 2 directors to represent regions of the board president and immediate president serving from, if those officers come from regions that have only one representative pursuant to sections 2 and 3 of OSBA bylaws. Directors shall take office from January 1st and shall serve for a term of 2 calendar years or until their successors are elected and qualified. In odd number years, board members elect regional representatives for even numbered positions on OSBA Board of Directors. Member boards also vote to elect all regional representatives on the Legislative Policy Committee. In even number years, member boards vote to elect regional representatives for odd number positions on the OSBA Board of Directors. The OSBA president, president-elect, vice president, immediate past president, and secretary-treasurer are nominated and elected by the board pursuant to Section 5 of the OSBA bylaws. The names and the emails of each officer you can see at the top of the page as you see them here, and their roles at the bottom of the page. Those roles are defined by OSBA bylaws. As an OSBA member, you are asked to attend the OSBA Board of Directors meetings in January, March, April, June, September, November, and other meetings as needed, the fall regional meeting in your region, and when possible and very encouraged, OSBA annual convention, annual membership meeting in November, and other OSBA conferences and training sessions. You can see the board members' emails and the regions they were elected from, and the ex officio members who serve as the board members' advisors, non-voting member advisors. OSBA policy delegates the board of directors the authority to create the programs of the association, carry out association business between special and annual meetings. As a group, we are subject to the direction by a majority of association members at a regular special meeting. As individual OSBA members, each member reports and is responsive to the needs of the region electing the member. As defined in our policy 2100, board members assume responsibility by participating in the board of director meetings to fulfill several duties that are available for you to review, including carrying on the necessary business for the board, employing an executive director and determining their position, the compensation and duties. At regularly called meetings, fill all vacancies in position until the next scheduled board meeting election. Meet not less than twice annually in accordance to Oregon Public Meeting Law and OSBA bylaws. Determine the place, date, and hour of regularly board meetings to serve or cause to be served proper notice in according to Oregon Public Meeting Laws and OSBA bylaws. Adopt annual budget for the corporation. With the cycle is starting soon for us for adopting the budget. Take action or approve committees and committee appointments as outlined in bylaws, OSB bylaws section 4. Require an annual budget, an annual audit of the books of the secretary treasurer and any other officer or employee who handles corporation funds. Determine the site of the corporation office. Authorize such special committees as deemed necessary for the proper operation of the corporation. Review the regional structure of the corporation at least every 3 years. Any recommendation changes for the regional structure shall be submitted to the membership in accordance to OSBA bylaws section 2.7. Promotes active involvement of OSBA members within region in which the director represents, or the caucus that you represent, of course. Prepare and distribute an impact statement of any resolution to be placed before the membership. Adopt annually an elections calendar that establishes a timetable for electing our board members, LPC positions, and voting on a resolution. Retain a 50 million reserve that may only be accessed by a 2/3 vote of both the board of directors and OSBA membership. So we have huge duty to our members and the institution as outlined here. The eligibility, meeting minutes, and other documents are available for you on the website. And also, if you're asked about how can I run for OSBA, you can review the OSBA elections page and elections information. The president-elect oversees the elections, and They are conducted in a manner where individual boards conduct their ballots to vote for resolutions, regional representatives, and the LPC committee members as outlined earlier. So this page will be handy for anybody who's interested in serving in the future during the election cycle. Next up, we'll go to the map. So if you're asked to how OSBA regions are represented, in addition to two caucus statewide caucus representatives, you can review OSBA governance documents, including the map, which outlines also your member school districts and community colleges that belong to your region. And the numbers represent the seats for the board directors and the LPC committee members. Next up, is there any other documents, Lanelle, we should be reviewing in this stage? The governance regions, elections process, officers, and board directors. I believe that's it. Is that correct?
That's it. I think Haley has the next section of governance documents.
All right, governance documents. Next up for Haley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Haley Purcell. I haven't had an opportunity to introduce myself yet. So I'm the Chief Legal Officer and the Interim Deputy Executive Director. In the Chief Legal Officer role, I am responsible for looking out for the legal needs of the organization. And I thought I would take this moment to just let you know that one of our speakers coming up in a couple of agenda items is Bob Steringer, and he's one of the outside lawyers that helps our organization with a variety of different legal matters. And so he will be speaking in a couple agenda items. I'm going to be talking about the governance documents. Linnell is going to navigate to the bylaws. So you go to the OSBA governance tab, and then the bylaws are right there. So before I really talk about what the bylaws are, you might be thinking, why does OSBA have bylaws? I don't have bylaws at my district. Why does OSBA have bylaws? So OSBA is a different entity type than a district. So we have different laws that apply to our organization. It's a public benefit corporation, and it's incorporated under the Oregon Nonprofit Corporation Act. And for anyone that's interested in reading that act and learning more about this entity type, it's ORS Chapter 65. Many of you may hear the words nonprofit and think, oh, 501c3. We work with nonprofits on our board, our district boards. We are actually not a 501c3. We are tax exempt under Section 115 of the tax code. So OSBA is a very unique organization. There are not a lot of organizations like us in Oregon. And so as you do your work as an OSBA board member, you might notice differences between being on the OSBA board versus being on your local district board that you serve on. And I'm going to talk about some of those differences. And then Bob, when he talks in a couple of agenda items, we'll talk about some additional differences between serving on a school district board versus the OSBA board. So now getting to the bylaws and why we have them. So the Nonprofit Corporation Act requires public benefit corporations like ourselves to have bylaws. So you're required by law to have bylaws. The OSBA board first adopted their bylaws on December 15th, 2017, and that was approved by the OSBA membership. So only the membership can approve bylaws and approve changes to the bylaws. So the OSBA board of directors does not have that authority. It has to be approved by the OSBA membership. These bylaws control all of the organization's activities. And if there are any documents that conflict with the bylaws are what controls. So if we have something that's in a policy or a guideline that differs from the bylaws are going to be the document that we go to, and the bylaws are the one that decide the conflict. We have to follow the bylaws before any other documents other than the articles of incorporation. The articles of incorporation are not very detailed, so there isn't very much information in those. But if there happened to be a conflict between the articles of incorporation and the bylaws, the articles of incorporation would control. The governance committee, I have another section later on tonight about the different committees and who is on the committees and what they do. But the governance committee is the committee that's responsible for periodically reviewing the bylaws and making recommendations for amendments. So the bylaws were reviewed last year by the governance committee. Recommendations were brought to the full board, and the membership did vote on those and approved those revisions in 2023. The governance committee will be meeting here soon. Their first meeting of the year will be March 15th, and they will be again reviewing the bylaws and making decisions about whether further revisions are necessary. So more to come on that. If the governance committee decides that there are revisions that need to be made to the bylaws, that will come to the full board, most likely in the June meeting. So if that comes to you, this is your heads up that you might be seeing some revisions to the bylaws in the June meeting. Okay, so going to the OSBA policies. So Linnell's going to take us to where you can find those on the website, the governance information tab and the policies. So the OSBA policy manual contains the policies pertaining to the organization and management of OSBA, and these supplement the articles of incorporation and the bylaws. The policy committee is the OSBA committee responsible for periodically reviewing the policies and making recommendations to the full board regarding revisions. And again, when I talk about the committees in more detail, I'll talk a little bit more about the policy committee at that time. The board does a full review of the policy manual every 5 years, and the last time that was done was in 2018. So that's going to be done again this year. So expect that in future board meetings, you will see proposed revisions to the policy manual. The policy committee is going to have their first meeting next Tuesday morning. So we are moving full steam ahead with revising the policy manual. So at a future board meeting, you should expect to see some revisions that are brought forward by the policy committee. Let's see, let's go to the board guidelines and procedures, which are found in the portal, My Resources, My Association, and OSBA board resources. And you can find the guidelines and the procedures both here. And the guidelines and the procedures are basically that sometimes they're step-by-step instructions on how to complete a particular task. They just provide best practice guidance and some operational type instruction for accomplishing certain tasks, like adding or eliminating a caucus, which I'll talk about when I talk about committees and caucuses, or appointing an advisory committee. It has details about how those things work. These guidelines and processes are typically developed by the executive team of the board or staff, and then adopted by the board. And then the last thing I wanted to show you with respect to governance is where we keep the OSBA board minutes. And those are on the website under the About tab, Board of Directors, and meeting minutes. So that's where you can find the meeting minutes. And then the caucuses have their meeting minutes on their own web pages. So you have to go to the caucus web page to see their minutes. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Haley. Appreciate that review. Next item on the agenda is a discussion or an overview of Board of Directors and Executive Director Operating Agreements, which Linnell is browsing under the Board of Directors tab, or under the About Board of Directors, then OSBA Board and Executive Director Operating Agreements. And you can see the documents here that was adopted most recently on February 4th, 2022. So the Board of Directors and Executive Director Operating Agreement is basically a guiding document that and a commitment from both board members individually and the board collectively with the executive director or designee in how we will be working together. So the Board of Directors as a policy-making body delegates and effectively accomplish the mission of OSBA, meets the mission of OSBA by working collaboratively with the executive director to function together in a way that achieves our objectives. And to do that, there are some agreements that we have committed to. The first one I will go over is the governance principles. which you can see here, how we work with each other and how we observe best practices in terms of governance principles, not only as best practices, but also as an agreement with our executive director. So I encourage us all to review those principles and make sure as we do our discussions, prioritize our actions, and make our decisions are abiding and following those governance principles to effectively achieve the mission or meet the mission of OSBA. The board operating agreements, which is next up, is basically what we commit to is to keep our OSBA mission in front of us at all times. Think bigger picture, students, your region, the state, and the nation. Assume positive intent while actively working to maintain trust. Listen actively and respectfully to all perspectives without sidebar conversations, listening to understand with the possibility that we may change our minds. Be thoughtful about sharing discussion time with other board members and be careful not to dominate the airtime. Disagreeing respectfully, speaking about the issue, not the individual. No surprises, and that delineates how we allow to executive officers, the staff, and the executive director to be able to prepare for the work of the board by giving notice in terms of questions and agenda items. And we have discussed recently in support of this guiding principle, the process to propose agenda items to the executive committee and the executive committee to the board. And there are some items that I encourage us all to review here. After that, reviewing information before arriving at meetings. Always come prepared, reviewing the packet. And if you have any discussions, reach out either to Linnell, the executive director, Haley, Emily or Haley as a designee, or myself with any questions you have beforehand. If considerable work or time is required to generate data when a director or officer makes a request for staff, a majority of the officers and executive director must endorse that request to be protective in terms of prioritizing what staff time is spent on. Recognizing the responsibility of the executive committee to make decisions when it is not timely or prudent for the entire board to meet. The board committee meeting minutes will be brief, and it discusses that here. The next item is virtual meetings. I'm not going to go in detail about that, but there are some virtual meetings recommendations. I want to preface, I have heard some feedback about that, so please review those. And if you have any feedback about those, we are still learning how we're doing virtual meetings and what can we do to make them more effective and inclusive for all. Role and expectations of the executive committee. So those responsibilities and expectations are consistent with the authority of the executive committee according to the bylaws and the policies. They elaborate on the role and expectations of the executive committee more specifically. The role of the president as a spokesperson on behalf of the board, convener of meetings and making appointments subject to the approval of the board, ensuring internal communication with the board and executive director is complete and timely, and working with the executive committee to implement the board professional development. Expectations of the executive director, functioning with the board of directors as a team, respecting and acknowledging the board role in setting policy and overseeing the performance of the executive director, providing data to the board of directors so that data-driven decisions can be made, informing the board of all critical information, including trends, adverse media coverage that we're anticipating, or critical external or internal changes, facilitating support to the success of the board of directors as regional ambassadors, and caucus ambassadors, encouraging participation in the statewide task force opportunities, communicating with the executive committee if there is a problem or a challenge or an issue that is observed, developing with an individual board member, representing OSBA by engaging in key partnerships around the states, and serving as a key spokesperson, speaking for and about the association. So the history of this document is documented and the bottom of it. It is a living document that we commit ourselves to observe. Please take a moment to review it on your own time. If you have any questions or thoughts or feedback, please share it. And to my recollection, we also re-adopted it earlier in our January meeting in 2024. It is our tradition annually to re-adopt the document, even without an amendment. So probably this document may need to be changed since there's re-adoption without amendments in 21. So we will reflect that and publish that soon. If you have any questions about it or suggestions, I encourage you to share those. And in your own individual school districts, if you don't have a working agreement with your superintendent, I encourage you to consider that. It helps really for effective functioning of the board. Now, speaking of, sometimes there are differences between governance boards of nonprofits, or governmental bodies, or bodies similar to OSBA with a specific standing or legal circumstance. Because of that, I would like to move to the next agenda item, which is the role of a nonprofit board and how it differs from a school board role. With that, I'll hand it over to OSBA's legal counsel, Robert Staringer. Robert, the floor is yours. I'm sorry, I know you go by Bob as well. And Bob, if you're speaking, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I hope folks can see my slides. Is that available?
Yes, we do.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Sorry about the little delay there. And thank you, Haley, for introducing me. I am Bob Staringer. I am a lawyer in private practice at Hurang Long PC, and I've had the real pleasure of working for OSBA for a number of years now. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight as you are taking in a lot of information in a short period of time. And I will continue with that as the president said, talking a bit about your role as directors of a nonprofit corporation and how that differs to some extent from your role as a school board member. Let's start with what should be familiar ground for all of you, which is government ethics. If I'm hoping that in your home district you've received training or you have received training in an OSBA program on government ethics. I'm guessing that most of you are very familiar with this, and I'm not going to go into great detail about it. For one thing, I know Spencer is going to touch on this a little bit later as well, but I trust that this is something that you're familiar with based on your service on school boards. What you probably have picked up from that is that there are a number of obligations that are placed on school board members and most public officials in Chapter 244 of the Oregon Revised Statutes. There are a number of different burdens, but are obligations, but the two that I think get the most attention are the prohibitions on conflicts of interest and the use of public office for private gain. And what you'll see when we go through the fiduciary duties that are placed on nonprofit board members is that there are some parallels to those as they apply to nonprofit board members, but the nonprofit obligations go beyond that. And so that's really going to be the primary thing that I want to leave you with today. I also want to make sure that you understand that both of these categories of obligations apply to you. Because the OSBA is a governmental entity, you should plan and you should comply with both the government ethics and the fiduciary duties that are imposed on nonprofit board members. There are three main categories of fiduciary duties that are imposed on nonprofit board members. Those are the duty of good faith, the duty of due care, and the duty of loyalty. And we will talk about each of those in a little more detail here, starting with the duty of good faith. The primary focus of the duty of good faith is that nonprofit board members are required to carry out the purposes of the nonprofit. So that the actions you take should be consistent with the stated purposes of the nonprofit corporation. To find that, you should look to your bylaws. That is where you have the primary statement of the purpose of the Oregon School Boards Association, right at the beginning of the bylaws. And when you're thinking about whether a decision you're making is in the best interests of OSBA, you should be thinking about whether it's consistent with those purposes. The duty of good faith also implies the obligation to comply with all governmental rules and regulations. We know that you would do that anyway, but that gets roped into the duty of good faith as well. And overall, you'll often find this duty of good faith described as the duty of obedience. And the best way that I can describe that is that it's a reminder that as a board member, you are here to serve the organization and its purpose, not the other way around. And so the nonprofit corporation, the OSBA, is not a platform to carry out personal agendas, although that will certainly inform your approach to the position. The real requirement, the fiduciary duty you have, is to act in the best interests of the organization as a whole, as its organizational documents specify it. The duty of due care requires that directors act with, and I'm going to start with the statutory description of the duty of due care. Directors must act with the care an ordinarily prudent person in a like position would exercise under similar circumstances. The best way to think about that is it's the duty to pay attention and to make informed decisions. That is what is really called upon here with the duty of due care. So the ways that you typically will do that is by attending your meetings, reading the packets and the materials ahead of time before you come to the meetings to make decisions, staying informed about the issues that are relevant to the OSBA, and supervising your executive director, which is your real sole employee, and being active in that role is consistent with the duty of due care. Now, you have a lot of protection under Oregon state law with respect to complying with the duty of due care if you rely on information from people that you reasonably believe to be competent to provide the information. So what I want to make sure you understand is that this isn't a trap. These duties are not a trap for board members as long as you stay informed and rely on the information that's provided to you by people that you can trust. Within the organization, that's probably going to be the officers of the entity of the OSBA, the employees, staff, starting with your executive director. Legal counsel qualifies. Hopefully you can reasonably rely on us. Accountants, other experts, and you can also rely on reports from OSBA committees that you don't serve on when they come to the board with some matter and that they've already vetted. So you have a lot of flexibility there in terms of relying on people who can help you make good decisions and comply with your duty of due care. Then the third duty is the duty of loyalty. This is where I think you'll find the most parallels to your government ethics duties. In all instances, you're required to act in the best interests of the corporation, even when that's contrary to your own personal interests. And the duty of loyalty also requires you to take care in connection with conflict of interest transactions. In the nonprofit world, conflict of interests are described more broadly than the way conflicts are described in government ethics. Government ethics conflicts are fairly specific and narrow, although they can come up quite a bit. In the nonprofit world, anytime that you're dealing with a decision or transaction in which you have any sort of personal interest, you potentially have a conflict of interest. You have an indirect conflict of interest as well if your decision or transaction involves close family members or businesses you're associated with. It's not necessarily limited to financial interests, which to a great extent the government ethics rules are focused on. So whenever you think that you might be faced with a decision that involves a personal interest or the interest of a family member or business member, you really should consult with Haley as legal counsel, Emily in the executive director role to get direction on how to do that. For the most, each sort of conflict or different types of conflicts require different actions. Most of the time you're talking about doing a disclosure and then recusing yourself from the decision that's made. It's fairly straightforward, and that's usually not problematic in an organization with a board as big as this. And then in the end, what's really important is that whatever decision gets made by the board is one that is fair to the OSBA and preferably is ratified by a majority of the board that doesn't include the person who has the conflict. So that's my quick run through fiduciary duties of nonprofit corporations. If any of you have questions about that, I know you can reach me through Emily and Haley.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. A very important review of the differences between a nonprofit board and the school board and the duties of the board officers and members of this organization. Much appreciation. And next item we have is OSBA board committees and caucuses. Haley, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, we have quite a few OSBA board committees. So this is, please bear with me, but I want to make sure everybody knows about all of our committees. So this is going to take just a while to kind of go through. The OSBA bylaws permit the board to create committees kind of as they deem necessary. And they have the ability to create ad hoc committees for kind of any purpose the board deems appropriate. There is a process for creating those ad hoc committees, and that process is set forth in the bylaws and the policies. We also have advisory committees, and we have one current advisory committee that I'll talk about. But an advisory committee may be created through board appointment, and members of these committees do not have to be OSBA members or directors, but at least one OSBA director must serve on an advisory committee. And these advisory committees have no power to act on behalf of the board, but may make recommendations to the board. So the current advisory committee we have is the Oregon LGBTQIA2S+ School Board Members Advisory Committee. And Linnell, I don't know if you're going to navigate to the website on this to show, I know you showed this earlier, but if you wanted to show that again, that might be a good visual aid as we kind of talk about the LGBTQIA2S+ Advisory Committee. And Director Katrina Dowdy is currently the liaison between the advisory committee and the board of directors. We're going to talk about caucuses here in a moment, but if a group would like to become a caucus, they have to be an advisory committee for a year before they can become a caucus. So that's kind of the first step in becoming a caucus. This advisory committee is staffed by OSBA staff members Kristen Miles and Jean Chiapizzi. So those are the two staff members that support that advisory committee. Now talking about caucuses, the OSBA caucuses exist to enhance the work of the association by addressing the unique needs of member districts. Each of our caucuses is required by the bylaws to have a vision, mission, and goals. They also have to adopt their own bylaws, so each caucus has their own bylaws, and they also must comply with all OSBA policies and guidelines. These caucuses are created through a process that's described in the OSBA bylaws and in accordance with a guideline that has been created, and it's titled Adding or Eliminating a Caucus. And you saw that earlier when Linnell took you to that. And right now she's showing you one of the caucus, the Rural School Board Member Caucus website, and kind of how that looks. So we have two caucuses currently. We've got the Oregon School Board Members of Color Caucus, which was established by a vote of the membership in 2018. And Director Neelam Gupta is the president. And if you have questions about the Color Caucus, you can reach out to Neelam Gupta with your questions. And then we also have the Oregon Rural School Boards Caucus, which was established by a vote of the membership in 2023. So fairly new caucus. And the director, Nicole Schott, is the president of that caucus. And so if you have any questions about the Rural Caucus, you can reach out to Nicole with questions. And it looks like Linnell's still got you here on that particular page that you can see. Some of the general committee and caucus requirements that I want to talk about. Each committee and caucus is required to take minutes at their meetings. And each committee and caucus also reports on its activities at the regular meetings of the board of directors. And then also, I'm going to be talking about this at the end of the night tonight. My final presentation tonight is on the public meeting law requirements, but each committee and caucus of the OSBA board is required to follow the public meeting laws, which I will go through. More information about the creation, process, and continuation of exploratory committees, advisory committees, or caucuses may be found in the OSBA process that is in the member portal. And it's titled Process for OSBA Provided Support Through the Exploration, Creation, and Continuation of an OSBA Caucus. So that's the document that you could go to learn more about how the caucuses are created. The Oregon School Board Members of Color Caucus is staffed by Emily Nischik and Linnell, and the Rural Caucus is supported by Lori Sattenspiel and Linnell. The OSBA board has several standing committees. Some of those standing committees are created in the bylaws, and some of those standing committees are created by policy. So the bylaws create the executive committee, the finance committee, the legislative policy committee. And then by policy, the board has created the budget committee, the governance committee, and the policy committee. And I'm going to go through each of these committees and let you know who is on those committees and kind of generally what they do and who staffs those committees. So starting with the executive committee. The executive committee consists of 5 officers of the board of directors, the president as chairman, the president-elect, the vice president, the secretary treasurer, and the immediate past president. The executive committee is authorized to act in between regular board meetings on behalf of the board unless it is a matter that has been reserved to the full board. So they can conduct quite a bit of business in between meetings and then report back to the full board on what their business is that they've been working on in between board meetings. And that committee is staffed by Emily and Linnell. Next, I'm going to talk about the Finance Committee, which is another committee that's created by the OSBA bylaws. And members are appointed by the president to the Finance Committee and are composed of members from Oregon Public School Districts, Education Service Districts, and community colleges with boards that meet all criteria to be association voting members. The members include, but are not limited to, the OSBA Board Secretary, Treasurer, and Vice President, 1 director from the PACE board, so the board that Dave was kind of talking about when he did his introduction of the PACE program, 1 district business official, and 1 at-large board member. And the Finance Committee members who are appointed serve for a term of 2 years unless they are appointed to replace a member who left the committee before finishing their 2-year term, in which case they would just serve the remainder of the 2-year term remaining from that 2-year term when they left. And the Finance Committee operates within OSBA's investment guidelines and the Finance Committee operating guidelines. And that committee is staffed by Chris Davidson and Jamie Conder. Then we have the Budget Committee, and that consists of the Executive Committee and the Finance Committee. The function of the Budget Committee is defined in the Finance Committee Operating Manual and Investment Policy. And the Budget Committee is also staffed by Chris Davidson and Jamie Conder. Next, we have the Governance Committee, which is another standing committee appointed by the board president and subject to approval by the board. The committee consists of the board president, who serves as chair, at least 6 directors, and the board past president as an ex officio member. And the directors' terms of office are 2 years with no term limits and staggered start dates beginning in January. And I talked about the governance committee briefly before, but in addition to reviewing bylaws, they are also responsible for reviewing OSBA's regional structure every 3 years, developing and overseeing the process for the executive director's evaluation. So that'll be a topic. The executive director's evaluation is a topic that will come to you in the June board meeting, most likely. The governance committee is also in charge of overseeing the board's professional development and strategic planning oversight for OSBA. And the governance committee is staffed by myself and Linnell. The policy committee I mentioned briefly earlier is also another standing committee that's appointed by the board president, subject to approval by the board. And the policy committee consists of the board president-elect, who serves as chair, and at least 2 board directors of the board. And the directors' terms of office are 2 years with no term limits and staggered start dates beginning in June. And as I described before, the function of the policy committee is to bring policy recommendations to the board for consideration and adoption. And Spencer Lewis is the staff member of the policy committee, and he is assisted with Colleen Allen in that task. And then finally, last but not least, we've come to our final committee here, the Legislative Policy Committee, LPC. And the LPC develops legislative policies which are recommended to and approved by the members as a resolution proposed by the board of directors and voted on by the membership. The LPC also advises the executive director and staff during legislative sessions. The LPC is composed of the voting members of the board of directors and regional elected representatives, 1 designated voting member of the Oregon School Board member of Color Caucus, and 1 designated voting member of the Oregon Rural School Board Caucus. And each committee member takes office on January 1 in even numbered years and serves a term of 2 years. And the LPC is staffed by Lori Satinspill and Linnell, which I believe Lori is next up on the agenda, but I will turn it back to Mr. President to move us along on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Haley, for the very thorough review of our committees. Just to highlight, you're going to hear a lot from the committees in this upcoming year for many reasons, to be protective of board time and staff time, to allow the committees to conduct the work that they've been delegated to by policy, and for sure to allow us to move forward with the important needs of this organization as it moves forward with the strategic planning and identifying needs for review of different priorities that we have ahead of us. And as Haley mentioned, one of our primary objectives is legislative advocacy, guided by our Legislative Policy Committee that is composed half of it by the board and the other half by appointed members, respectively from the same regions and caucuses representing the board. With that, Lori, take it away.
Thanks, Mr. President. So I am going to talk a little bit more about the Legislative Policy Committee and then move into the legislative priorities and principles. So Linnell has our page up there. There is a ton of resources. If you need anything, it's on this page. Believe me, Linnell has covered it all. Over the past 4 years, we have added vignettes to learn how to do things, a lot of 101 on advocacy. There's a brochure in there that you could print out about guide to advocacy. So just feel free to click around and familiarize yourself with that particular page because there is just a lot of stuff in there. As a reminder, I know Haley talked about it a little in the bylaws. The role of the primary role is to set the legislative agenda. And we are just beginning that process. Most of you, if not all of you, were at the first meeting that we had in January, but we did in Zoom, and that begins our agenda planning for 25-26. Our next meeting is April 19th and 20th in person here in Salem. And I would say another role for the LPC members is to participate, communicate, advocate, and serve as a resource for your region. So I keep hounding on that because we need to change how we advocate, because the demographics of the legislature has changed. A lot of things have changed since COVID. So we recently have updated how we build our agenda. We need to advocate in different ways. We need to hear more input from the field. Again, there's 45 members. I think I just counted everybody. And we realize everybody has regular jobs, family commitment. Our job as the Legislative Services Department, Efren, Linnell, and I, is to help you be successful in that role as an LPC member. So we are here to help you. The actual legislative policy document, let me see, you're gonna pull that up, Linnell. So when last cycle, we changed the legislative priorities and principles document from the priorities and the principles document is now a foundational document. We needed to get more feedback from all of you about various topics. And the way we were doing it before, which was wordsmithing documents, just did not give us great direction. So the preamble has an equity statement here at the beginning. And then the priorities, we're always going to have a funding priority. And now that the Student Success Act is in, we need to protect it. We always are working on closing the opportunity gap and containing of cost drivers. So none of that's really changed. So those priorities is where we would spend as staff a lot of time preparing what that might look like. And then when you get to the principles, finance, student programs, safety, personnel, governance, and the federal side is more about when we see bills, where does that fit based on the principles of how we're operating? So I'm excited as we get ready to work on this agenda coming up for 25-26, because funding, it's our turn. It's funding again. We cannot get out of our current service level issue. So we are really going to be focused on funding, and with funding comes more accountability. So those will be the two big agenda items that I think we're going to continue to focus on. So that way we can elevate you as LPC members and your voices. I think I'm going to stop there. I think I'm running out of gas on Friday night. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And thank you for all what you and Efren and the LPC members and those who show up alongside with you at the building in Salem for what you do. We're in the middle of short session. We have a really important work that you always highlight to our members. I want to also remind board members that Lori and her team conduct updates on frequent basis. So please be sure to attend those. I want to just pause for a question that was asked. Board members, term limits. You will find out, I believe, Haley, is that in the bylaws or the policies where the term limits for our board of directors is defined?
It's in the bylaws, and I cut and pasted the language right into the chat there.
Awesome. So for those who are interested in learning more about the term limits for board directors, they can review the bylaws in 3.4, which delineates those directors who took office prior to January 1st, 2018. and are re-elected may serve for any number of terms as long as they continuously remain on the board. But those who have taken office after January 1st may serve 5 consecutive 2-year terms, and if eligible, may rerun after a 2-year hiatus. And there are more details into the term limits and service. This is actually a good reminder. I'm gonna pause here to remind us, as you serve on the board, if it is time where you think you may want to transition, start recruiting LPC members or start recruiting people to apply for LPC in your region. Always building the pipeline is going to be so essential for the organization to continue doing its work. Thank you, Greg, for that question. So the next item on the agenda we're going to move to is the NSBA and partner organizations with our acting executive director, Emily Nishik. Emily.
Thank you, Mr. President. So Linnell pulled up on here a shot of all of the logos for the partner organizations that we work really closely with. There are others that are not represented on here, but these are kind of our really close partners that we work both on the legislative side of things, what Lori was talking about, and then also support our board and staff on professional development, or that we also provide a lot of training and support to those organizations, mostly through legal services, and Michael and Haley's team with our attorneys providing presentations and support to conferences. So OSBA staff and board attend a lot of conferences throughout the year, and part of that is relationship building, making sure that we're having in the room when the conversations are happening and being able to be in a good place for then when we do have to kind of hash out those legislative issues or get on the same page with a legislative issue, having that time together to really build those relationships is really important for us. We're really spreading that out amongst the team. So Dave supports and sponsors through PACE. Many of these organizations and their events, he travels the state, having a booth and talking to our membership, because PACE really works not only with school boards, but really with the administrative side of things, and having relationships with superintendents and business officials is important to the work of PACE and to OSBA. NSBA is the National School Boards Association. We are, OSBA is a member of that. And Mr. President serves on the national board for NSBA. And Haley also serves as the chair of the Council of School Attorneys, which is an entity of NSBA as well. And so we're very closely tied into the work of NSBA and supporting that. We attend most all of the conferences and regional work that happens. There's a Pacific region within that that we participate in for leadership opportunities for the executive committee. And in addition to that, the caucuses can also do scholarships to send members to the NSBA conferences and leadership summits for professional development for board members. With the kind of our really close partnership that we meet regularly, especially during the legislative session, but even off session, is with the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators and OSEA and the other OEA. So we meet every other week as a team with Lori and their lobbyists to be able to troubleshoot and work through issues throughout the year that pertain to all of our organizations. We're all kind of taking different perspectives on some of the legislative and policy pieces. And so it's a time for us to come together to find understanding and also for areas where we might disagree, but maybe we need to be able to provide our perspective on those legislative pieces. So I think Lori and team does a great job of a lot of outreach with a lot of our partner organizations. It really is a team effort for us in being able to have representation with our partner organizations around the state.
Thank you, Emily. Please take a moment when you meet a member of those organizations or a leader of those organizations to thank them for their partnership with OSBA. Working with those organizations is crucial. It takes a village, and this is the village of the community that supports the students statewide and also across the nation. Next up, we have a calendar of events. So if you are curious what is going to happen in 2024, we have one landing page for you to have access to. Please put those as a placeholder on your calendar. I just did before this meeting. Linnell or Emily, feel free to guide us. How can we find out what's coming up for OSBA as an organization and a board?
Yep. So Linnell is showing you where to go for that. We do have a full calendar of events for 2024. And there's the calendar, and then there's kind of a key on the side that will show you the key events that are happening throughout the year that pertain to board members. I think the ones that I definitely want to call attention to is we have moved over the last couple of years to doing some board meetings in person and some more board meetings virtually. And so our March board meeting is coming up on March 9th. It will be a virtual meeting that we will be holding. And then we're doing something a little bit different this year that Lori talked about, where we're doing the Legislative Policy Committee, which of course you are all a part of as well. Is going to be coming together in person in April to help set the legislative policy agenda for 24-25. And so that's different this year, and that's a little bit of a change than what we've done in the past, but you all will have the opportunity to come back in person in April to be able to do that. And then our June board meeting will be virtual again, and that's really the time where we set the budget for next year and kind of go through a lot of business in that meeting. The other one that is important is our board retreat. So that will be happening in September. That's more time for us to come together and kind of dive into the work a little bit more. Last year, that was when we had roundtables with all the directors where you could kind of get an update on their work, have those more in-depth conversations about the work that we do as an organization and get your questions answered. And so we'll be working with the executive committee on mapping out what that looks like this year. But definitely hold that on your calendar. It's a really important time for us to both build community, get to know one another, which is definitely something that we've heard that folks want to have that time to get to know one another and hopefully have some fun activities in there as well. We are finalizing the location on that, but definitely hold that on your calendar. And then you can see all of the other important events that we have, both for NSBA, if you're interested in going to annual convention or a conference, those will all be up there and updated for you, so you can plan ahead for the coming year.
And I just noticed actually the NSBA summer leadership scheduled in September, just very recently within the last couple of weeks. We're going to move to push that to early January. That might be only for our officers to just know and put in their mind for whoever may be applying to be the next vice president and secretary treasurer, just to put in your mind that early January, the Equity Institute and the Equity Symposium Leadership Institute might be a little bit longer, where you might want to attend a few days earlier for whatever will be an alternative to the summer leadership seminar. So we're not going to have the NSBA summer leadership seminar anymore in August, September. It is a way for NSBA members to save some costs and also to encourage them to go to the NSBA Cube annual conference. So I'm going to just throw in the plug here. If you're interested in any of NSBA opportunities, I encourage you to do so. It's a really great community to learn lessons learned and encourage your individual board and district to participate in those opportunities. And if you have any questions, happy to answer them. With that, I believe we concluded our calendar of events. Now, next up is the conflict of interest and ethics overview. Spencer Lewis.
Yes, hopefully you're able to see the screen share? Hopefully it looks okay for everybody. Bob Steringer started to talk about it, and I thought, I was like, oh, I got the night off. What am I doing here? But no, I'm going to talk very briefly on conflict of interest and ethics under Oregon ethics laws. If you've been to summer board, oftentimes we present for an hour and 15 minutes on this topic, and we don't even get through it because there's just so many questions, so many hypotheticals that come in. I do encourage you to put your questions into the chat. Haley and Michael are actually in charge of it right now. So send all your questions right now, send them into Haley. We'll do our best to get all of the answers that you need. But I do want to, my goal tonight is not to make you all experts on Oregon ethics laws. My goal tonight is to get some things in your brain so that when situations arise, you think about it and say, oh, this might be, I need to do some research. I need to look into this, so that you can look into it. You can figure out, what do I need to do to handle this conflict, or how do I proceed? Because there are a lot of great resources out there. So this is a list of what I plan to talk about. I only have 30 minutes max. So actually my hope is that we get to prohibited use and talk about that a little bit. I don't think we'll get through everything here, but if we do, that's great. But we're going to start with the laws, resources, some background on Oregon ethics laws, really giving you some resources so that if you do have questions at some point, you can find the answers that you need. Then we're going to talk about conflicts of interest under Oregon ethics laws, not under nonprofit laws, but under the Oregon Government Ethics Commission rules and everything there. We'll talk about gifts, prohibited use and how they overlap with gifts, and then really briefly, honoraria, nepotism, statement of economic interest, and the acknowledgement and disclosure form. So talk about an exciting Friday night right here. Here we go. So Oregon ORS 244 is the chapter of Oregon statute that talks about ethics laws. And all of these terms, they're in the opening introduction to this. And so it's really interesting, some of the different pieces. But if you look at some of these words, you can identify, okay, this is what the legislature was thinking about when it was drafting these laws. So we won't get into any of them, specifically, but a lot of different purposes here, and identifying, what do we want out of our public officials? Here's some language there. Lots and lots and lots of words. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to remember all of it, but we will talk about a few key pieces that you want to make sure that you're aware of, because they come up more often in your role on the OSBA board and also on your local school boards. Another place that we look to is Oregon Administrative Rules, so OARs. And just most of you probably know this. ORS stands for Oregon Revised Statutes. Those are adopted by the legislature. So those are statute, those are law that the legislature adopts. OARs are the administrative rules. They're also law, but they're adopted by state agencies. So in this situation, OAR Chapter 199, those are all adopted by the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. And the Ethics Commission is over the ethics laws. They're also now over public meeting laws, which Haley's going to talk about a little bit later. But OGEC, they're great, they're wonderful. And these are some of the rules that they have adopted to help implement some of the ethics laws. And they're much shorter than some other OARs. So some agencies, they just seem to copy everything that's in statute and put it in a rule. OGEC does not do that. They are very good at only adopting rules that add to or clarify what's in statute. So that's a great place to look on these topics. Another great resource is the document called A Guide for Public Officials. And this is from the Ethics Commission. It goes through a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about today. Some of the examples that I use, I pulled straight from the Ethics or from this booklet, and they update it from time to time. So it is up to date. It is has some good resources in there and helps explain and give some examples. Because I will say that ORS 244, the statutes as adopted by the legislature, they're not the most beautifully written. It's not super well written as far as just reading it and understanding it. The purpose is there. There's definitely some great intent there, but there's some confusion, if you read through the chapters in statute. And this booklet helps you get there, helps you understand. And it's available online, a great resource. And then the other resource that I wanted to bring up is just OGEC's website, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. And probably 5 years or so ago, they actually received an award for having a great accessible website. So as you can see here, there's a lot of stuff on here. There's a link for the guide for public officials. You can request advice, so you can send an email. For example, I sent an email to the Ethics Commission today around a particular question, and I got an email back this afternoon. So they are usually very, very responsive. One caveat though, do not email them after the fact that you may have violated ethics laws. Make sure you email them before the fact. If you email them after the fact, usually they'll just decline to comment, but they could open up an investigation if it's after the fact. So make sure that you're asking ahead of time. They're wonderful to work with. I don't always agree with them. I don't always understand their logic, but they're great to work with. So some great resources for you. You might be asking, well, how am I a public official? Like, why does this apply to me? Why am I spending my Friday night learning about this? There's a couple reasons why this applies to you. First, in statute, you as a school board member or as a board member of OSBA, you are a public official under elections law. And then also our OSBA policies specifically say that you will comply with all Oregon Government Ethics Commission laws. So this applies to you, like it or not, it does. So that's how it applies. If you have any questions on that, you can talk to us and we'll do our best to answer those. The first thing that we're going to talk about though is conflict of interest. And if we were in person, I would pass out like something that was supposed to look like a newspaper or like an old highlights magazine that has two pictures next to each other and says, can you identify the differences? Because under Oregon law, there are two types of conflicts of interest. One is an actual conflict and one is a potential conflict. And the differences are obviously in the name, but also there's just one other word that is different. So an actual conflict of interest is an action that you would be taking as a public official, so as a board member, as an OSBA board member, that would be to the private pecuniary benefit or detriment, have a financial impact on you or one of your relatives or the business that you're associated with. The potential conflict, you just change that would to could. So not 100%, there's a chance that it could cause an impact. Now there's a lot of words here. I think this is a much better definition, much more workable. So a conflict of interest is any decision it should just say by a public official. Sorry about the addition of the word person there. By a public official, which would or could impact a relative or associated business financially, or yourself. You're included as a relative there. So if you think about what decisions do I make as a board member that are going to financially impact those around me, myself, my family, or a business that I'm associated with? And the answer is probably not that often. In some situations, you may have a relative that works in the school system or potentially that works for OSBA or a contractor that regularly contracts with either OSBA or your school district. And that's when conflicts of interest tend to arise. Some of you may have served on the board for a number of years and you've never had a conflict, and that's great. But some of you may have served on the board and for only a couple of years and you've already had a conflict. That's also great. Just because you might have a conflict does not mean that you can't serve. It just means that you want to follow a few steps to make sure that you're not making the decision that's going to impact them. So it always comes up, who is considered a relative under Oregon ethics laws? And here's a quick list. Your spouse, your parent, your step-parent, your child, your sibling, or your child-in-law, and also those of your parent or of your spouse. And then anyone who you have a legal support obligation for, and then also anyone who receives benefits from your employment or you receive benefits from their employment. So those are a little bit more rare to have them outside of the traditional list of relatives. One thing you'll notice here, it does not include an unmarried partner. So that is not included. There is a term member of household. So if you live in the same household, then different laws may apply to them. Generally, or in a lot of laws, when we say spouse, we mean, we use that term very broadly, especially in benefits and things like that. But under ethics laws, it is limited to spouse. And there's a question in the chat. Does the conflict of interest include the term phrases knowingly or to the best of their knowledge? So the actual definitions in statute, I'm trying to think of, well, I guess we could go back. I don't believe that they don't talk specifically around if you should know or should have known. The Guide for Public Officials does talk about that a little bit, that if you have reasonable, that you know that you might be voting on something in the future. So let's say you're on your school board and, you know, to your knowledge, you're not looking at going out for a bond or anything in the near future or anything like that. Actually, that example is not going to work for this. Sorry about that. So if you don't know that there's a conflict, or it probably come up in the potential, if you don't know about it, then the Ethics Commission wouldn't hold that against you. I'm trying to think of an example. I'm not coming up with one right now, and I'm not going to waste your time as I come up with another poor example. So, but we can follow up by email if that question persists. So, how do we handle conflicts of interest? It's pretty simple. If you have an actual conflict of interest, you need to declare that in the meeting where that decision is going to be made. So you would, you'd ask, say, Mr. President, can I declare a conflict of interest? You could let the president know ahead of time so that they know what to expect. But you would declare that. Linnell is amazing. She will make sure that that goes into the minutes so that it's documented. After you have declared that, you cannot participate in the discussion about that, and you cannot vote on that. My recommendation, you go for a walk. Get outside, and you can stay in the room. That's not an ethics violation for you to stay in the room. But there have been times where people have been, or there's been questions about, well, were you making facial expressions? Were you staring down people to make sure that they voted yes or voted no or something like that? And everyone can always use a good, some fresh air. So I would just step outside and let them take care of the business. And then you come back in and join the board just like you would in any other situation. With a potential conflict of interest, you are also required to declare that in the meeting. So again, you would make sure that that's declared. Linnell, she'll make sure that that goes in the minutes. But after you declare a potential conflict, you're allowed to participate in the discussion and you are allowed to vote without restriction. So keep that in mind. If it's a potential conflict, you're going to be able to participate, but it is very, very, very important that you declare that conflict. Some examples. Let's say the board is voting on whether or not to remodel a building, and your child owns a construction company that would be interested in, submitting a bid for that contract. In this situation, that would just be a potential conflict, because just because the board votes to remodel or, go out for bids or something like that, or just to, authorize the executive director to move forward in this direction, that does not mean that your child's business is going to get the contract or that your child is going to get a financial benefit. So that would be the could in the definition. So that's a potential, declare, then you can participate, and then you can vote. Another example, let's say the board is now voting to approve a contract with the company that your child owns. Well, now the contract will provide a financial impact on your child. Therefore, it's going to be an actual conflict, and you're going to declare, and then you would not participate and you wouldn't vote. So again, this doesn't come up super often, especially at the OSBA board level. Sometimes in smaller districts, it comes up. Sometimes, well, I think the most common is when it comes up to bargaining and things like that. And we can talk about that at another time. But that's what an actual and a potential conflict are. Just a note, and you can see it at the bottom of the page, for if you are an employee as opposed to a board member, the process applies a little bit different, how you declare and things like that. So if you're also a public official through your employment, you're not just going to declare, because you're not usually making your decisions in a board meeting. So there's a little bit of a different process there. So that was conflicts of interest. Now we're on to gifts. And this is the other piece. And usually when I talk about this, especially at like summer board with brand new board members, and I say gifts, and they're like, what? people are going to give me gifts because I'm on the board. Like, this is amazing. No, they don't really, at least to my experience in talking to board members, is that no, people don't just start giving you gifts because you're now on the board. But if they do, you probably want to be a little bit skeptical, or not skeptical, but you want to think through it and make sure that you can accept the gift. So this is broken down basically during a calendar year. Then you as a public official, if you're receiving a gift from someone who has, and they use the term legislative or administrative interest, a financial interest in a decision that you're going to be making, then you are limited to $50 in a calendar year from them. So you might think of, well, who might have a financial interest? Someone you might be contracting with, someone that might be hired by the district that you might be approving a raise, or different things like that. But if you're receiving a gift from them, you've got to keep it under $50 in the calendar year. So anytime someone comes to you and or tries to give you a gift, again, probably not super often, but you want to ask, does this person have a unique financial interest in a decision that I'm going to be making as a public official? And I include the word unique there because there are times where you're going to be making a decision that's going to impact perhaps the whole community. And if that's the case, well, it's impacting everyone in the same manner. They don't have a unique financial interest, like going out for a bond. Okay, well, that's going to impact everyone in the district in the same way, or at least in a similar manner. So every person in the community does not have a unique financial interest. Now, there could be a situation where, it's going to impact them the most, or it's going to, impact them in a way different than everybody else. So it may apply, but most of the time you're looking, do they have a unique interest? So if the answer is yes, they have a unique financial interest in a decision that I'm going to be making, then if the answer is yes, then there's a $50 limit. If the answer is no, then there's no limit. And you can accept all the gifts that you want from this person. You might ask, why are you giving me all these gifts? I don't know you. And maybe you'll find out, to Alonso's question, maybe you'll find out there is a connection that you just weren't aware of. But generally that's not happening. So that's gifts. This is from, and this is just an interesting piece that often comes up. If the item is coming from the agency that you serve, or the government agency, or the public body that you serve, it wouldn't go under the prohibited use, or it wouldn't go under the gift analysis if it's coming from the entity. So if it's coming from OSBA, it's not a gift analysis. It's going to be prohibited use analysis. And this quote, it's actually from the 2017 version of a guide for public officials. It's not in there anymore. This is what I emailed OGEC this morning about. She said that it's still, like, this is still their interpretation. She's not sure why it came out of the guide for public officials. I wish they would put it back in, because I'd rather quote the current version than an old version that is apparently still being followed. But that is something to keep in mind. Same thing goes if your school board, if your local district is the purchaser of the gift analysis doesn't actually apply. There are a lot of exceptions to gifts. And these include things, if it's from your relative, but a lot of them have to do with traveling, food and drink while you're on business of the entity, those kinds of things. So there's a lot of exceptions that come into play. They're not all super clear, but they're all in there in ORS 244. So if you have questions about that, then reach out. You can go to statute. The Ethics Commission can help you answer some of those questions. Prohibited use, and this is often referred to as the but-for provision. Basically, you can't use your position to obtain a financial benefit that you wouldn't get but for your position as a public official. And I'm going to skip, and we'll come back to this one. A few examples, and these are very similar to ones that came from the Guide for Public Officials. You couldn't use OSBA equipment for personal business use. You can't run an eBay store off of your OSBA if you have an OSBA computer or other OSBA equipment. You can't sign a contract that benefits your relative's business. You couldn't use a discount code that OSBA got for a purchase of a personal item. You can't store your motorhome on the OSBA parking lot. and avoid having to rent a space or something like that. You can't use contacts obtained through OSBA, through your position, in order to advertise a personal business or to seek out business or something like that. So really you can't use OSBA stuff for your own personal benefit. There are several exceptions to that, and they're here at the bottom of this slide. Obviously, official compensation. So if you're getting compensated, and under OGEC rules, compensation actually includes reimbursement. So it's kind of weird how they have it listed twice in statute. But if you're being reimbursed, honorarium, that's one that we'll talk about very briefly in a few minutes. Achievement awards, and then if it's a gift, if it's allowable as a gift, then it's not considered prohibited use. And if there's a gift exception that clearly exempts it from gifts, then also doesn't apply. And it gets really, really complicated when we start looking at prohibited, the Venn diagram, and I should have put a Venn diagram in here because that's the trademark of a good PowerPoint. But gifts and the prohibited use and the overlap of them. So if you have questions, again, the Ethics Commission is going to be your best resource, and they can help walk you through, is this allowed? Is this not allowed in this situation? Honoraria, this is something, but it's a very narrow thing that you can receive. And it's the definition is really just when someone gives you something for a service that you've performed, but it cannot be arranged ahead of time. Usually it's for like a speech or something like that, but it's very limited to, they thank you for speaking, speaking at this event. Here's a small token of our appreciation, those kinds of things. One thing that's in the Guide for Public Officials, which is, which this one, it's hard. I think it's weird a little bit, but a public official may not receive an honorarium while performing a service in the course of their duties as a public official. Because the but-for provision kind of works its way into that. So if people are offering you things, then again, just be hesitant, think it through, and then make sure that you make the right decision. So that's honoraria. Again, narrow. The next thing that I wanted to talk about briefly was nepotism. This doesn't happen a ton, but if you have relatives that would be a great fit at OSBA, we encourage them to apply anytime that we have an opening. We love great employees. But as a board member, as a public official, when it's a relative or a member of your household, you cannot participate in the appointing, employing, promoting, or discharging, firing, or demoting of that individual. Okay. Again, doesn't come up very often, but good thing to remember. There are some things that you can do. You certainly can serve as a reference. You can write a letter of recommendation. You could perform ministerial acts, which probably wouldn't happen in your role as on a board, but it is something that you could do. Let's say that, the secretary treasurer was, compiling resources or something like that, or applications, then you could certainly do those things that you were doing for everyone else, but you cannot participate in the interview or the discussion or the debate on the hiring of that individual. So good thing to keep in mind, always important. Statement of economic interest. So under Oregon law, if you are a district school board member, then you are required to fill out a statement of economic interest every year and submit it to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. Now, last year was the first year that this was required, and it was in the middle of a legislative session where there was potentially going to be a bill that, came through and changed the requirements and things like that. Not the case this year. Everyone who is a school board member is required to submit this by April 15th. My understanding is that OGEC is already reaching out to school board members and making sure that you know this and you've got the information that you need. It does not apply to ESD board members, does not apply to community colleges. I don't think. I looked through the statute and I couldn't see community colleges anywhere. Does not apply to charter schools. So interesting, I don't know why the legislature did it that way, but they did. And so if you need to, make sure that you fill that out. It's just another connection with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. And then my last slide, and I'm like well under 30 minutes. This is like a first in the history of Spencer presentations. An acknowledgement and disclosure form. Under the OSBA bylaws, it says that you'll annually complete and return a conflict of interest statement. It's also in our policy that says that you will do that. So in the coming days, you will receive a copy of this form, and we ask that you fill it out. You disclose any conflicts of interest that you might have, that you know of that you have. Obviously, if one comes up later, you're gonna declare it in the board meeting and take care of it in that manner. And then also any companies or businesses that you hold leadership positions in, again, towards the businesses that you may be associated with that could be impacted, any other boards that you serve on. One thing that I think it's really important to note is the presence of things in these boxes does not necessarily disqualify you to serve. It means that we just need to be careful and make sure that you don't run into issues, and we can help you work through those conflicts as they arise. And so after it's sent out, we'll give you the information to send it back in so we can make sure that everybody has that so that we can be complying with our bylaws here. Chris Howitt, how do we get the statement of economic interest? So it's through OGEC, and I believe you fill it out online, but I'm not positive, but I will follow up and I will get you an email before the end of tonight. Oh, Haley already put it in there. Thanks, Haley. But that's how you do that. Again, that's all through the Ethics Commission, and they do a really good job of reaching out. If they have your contact information, they'll let you know, but though, if you have questions on that, absolutely reach out to them. They can help you through those questions. And that's all that I have tonight. So with that, Mr. President, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Spencer, for very informative information that you have shared. I want to just reiterate, if you are in doubt or you have questions, ask them, reach out either to the Ethics Commission or your executive director or superintendent or the secretaries of the board you serve on. They will find the resources and information to help you and support you. Next item on the agenda is public meeting law for board members. Haley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's see if I can share my screen here. All right. Let's get that. All right. I think I'm slated for an hour, but I will not take an hour, I promise. I know this is our last agenda item and it's Friday night and we're all getting tired. So I will try to hit the high points here of the public meeting law for OSBA board members. And we did have very significant legislative changes to the public meeting laws last year. So even if you have received public meeting law training in the past, there are some new things that you may not have heard about yet. So I always like to start with the purpose, like Spencer did in his presentation of the law, because it helps you understand some of the laws. You know, sometimes they're confusing, like Spencer said, they're hard to understand. It's hard to understand why certain laws exist. And so if you think about the purpose, sometimes that helps kind of highlight why it is that it is a certain way. And so this is just directly from the statute. The Oregon form of government requires an informed public aware of the deliberations and decisions of governing bodies and the information upon which such decisions were made. It is the intent of the public meeting laws that decisions of governing bodies be arrived at openly. So the purpose is to have open dialogue so that people know what's happening with their tax dollars, that there aren't secret deals being made, and that things aren't being arrived at in secret, that it is being done in the open for all to see. I mentioned that there was a new legislative update last year in 2023, and this was actually the first significant change to the statute since it was enacted in 1973. So pretty big deal for us public entity attorneys. We finally have something new to talk about, which is always fun for us. What is a public meeting? This is not a new definition, but some of the terms were defined last session. So I'll talk about that. So a meeting means the convening of a governing body of a public body for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or to deliberate toward a decision on any matter. And convening and deliberate were defined. That's why they're underlined, and I'll talk about those here in the coming slides. But kind of an easy formula. If you have a quorum of your public entity, which in this case, we've got a 23-member board and all the positions are filled. So a quorum is 12 for this board. And if we've got a quorum discussing the business of the Oregon School Boards Association, that means a public meeting. So House Bill 2805 defined convening to mean gathering in a physical location. And that's typically historically how we had public meetings, was in a physical board meeting type location. As we are doing tonight, we are meeting electronically. So this is a new kind of platform that has began to be used for board meetings in the last few years. And it's still a public meeting, even though we're not in person. And so using electronic video or telephonic technology to be able to communicate among participants is a form of a public meeting. I'm going to come back to the OSBA email. I made a note so I didn't forget to talk about that. Using serial electronic written communication among participants can also be a convening of the board. And we see this on occasion where board members will start emailing each other about substantive matters, board business. And if you get a quorum of the board having these written email communications, or sometimes they're via text messages, and you end up getting a quorum of the board kind of involved in one of these communications, even if it's not contemporaneous, it's not all happening at the same time. Maybe board member A emails board member B today, but then tomorrow board member B emails board member C, and maybe over the course of weeks, days, you end up with a illegal meeting happening. So very important to just avoid all kind of substantive type conversations about OSBA business via text or email. And then also this new law, and these things were already prohibited by the public meeting law, but they were unclear to a lot of people. And so the legislature made it very clear by putting it in statute last year. And the final one is using an intermediary to communicate among participants. So in a district, that might be board members communicating with their superintendent. At the OSBA board, that might be board members communicating with the executive director. So just being really careful not to have a quorum of the board discussing business, even if it's through an intermediary who's not a board member. And, we'll work through these different scenarios as kind of this law develops. It's brand new. Haven't seen any case law kind of expanding upon this new law yet. Back to the OSBA email. So I'm not talking about public records tonight. I'm going to probably talk to the board about that at another time. But it kind of goes along with public meetings as well. We will be making OSBA email addresses available for OSBA board directors. So if you are interested in using an OSBA email address for your OSBA business, we have that available to you. So if you are interested in that, please reach out to Linnell and let her know. I would highly encourage OSBA board members to use the OSBA email system for a variety of reasons, but it helps the organization maintain these records. If you are emailing about board business, maybe it's not a quorum of you, so there's no illegal meetings happening, but you may be emailing about OSBA board business, and the OSBA entity has the responsibility to maintain certain public records for particular periods of time. And so if these emails are sitting in your Gmail account or at your school district or ESD or wherever your local board is, OSBA is not controlling those records anymore. They're in your Gmail, which would require you to maintain them for the appropriate amount of time under the OSBA record retention schedule. Or, a district would have to do that, but we as OSBA have no control then over those records, which is not easy to maintain records that you have no control over. And also it puts a lot of responsibility on the individual board member to make sure that they're maintaining records for the organization. And that, you guys are volunteers, you're volunteering your time, and that's a lot of burden on an individual board member to have to think, okay, what kind of emails have I received from OSBA? Are these things that I need to maintain for 10 years? What happens if, my email account, I deactivate it and I don't have it anymore, and then there's some sort of record request and I can't access those? It just causes a whole lot of problems if we've got emails sitting in email accounts that OSBA does not have control over. So I would highly recommend reaching out to Linnell saying, Linnell, can you please set me up with an OSBA email address, and then conducting all of your OSBA business via that email address. And I know that does cause a little bit of a burden, checking more than one email account, and you probably already have multiple email accounts. But I know that many members have already started giving their board members email accounts at their district. So you may work for or be on the board of a particular district, and you may have a district email address. We are just trying to model that here at OSBA, because that is a best practice. That's what we recommend that our districts do. And so now we're recommending that that's what the OSBA board members do. And I should have mentioned this, Spencer said this in his presentation, but since Spencer and Michael are in the chat, they can answer all your questions while I'm talking. So make sure you get all of your questions in the chat while I'm talking, so that they are the ones responsible for answering those.
Okay, I just have one. Sorry, Christy has asked for an example of that last one, and I'm not sure they can answer that question. Christy, do you want to expand on that question so then Michael and Spencer could answer that?
I reached out to Christy. I reached out to him. She gave an example. Can you go back one slide really quick, Haley?
Maybe. Let me see here.
It was an example of using an intermediary in order to create, have a conversation. I think the best example of that would be an intermediary to communicate among participants, probably a school board, like a local district setting. The best example would be that if one board member talks to the superintendent, and then the superintendent talks to board member number 2 and says, board member number 1 is in favor of this and has these ideas. Board member 2, what do you think? And then the superintendent then takes that information and gives it to board member 3. And then, potentially to board member 4, and just, and sharing information with everyone as they go through. And so you don't have a quorum of the board present or even conversing with each other at any one given time, but the use of the superintendent to communicate everyone's thoughts back and forth to each other, that would be an example of an intermediary. And the same could happen on our board. If you were using, anyone who's not on the board, whether that's Emily as the executive director or just a third party, to, communicate and, pass communications between each other in order to facilitate that conversation.
Spencer, could I follow up and ask, when I was on council, this came up quite a bit, and this has been clarified, but it's the deliberation that's the issue, right? So if you were to share, like on council, I was sharing an article about something we would be talking about maybe at council, but it was like an FYI, do not reply, but sharing information as long as people are not giving feedback or deliberation would be acceptable, right? And then
yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then my question about the email is the emails we're receiving now, like on our school district, once we set up a OSBA email, will all of the emails like invitation and Zoom invites, everything then be coming to only those emails, or will they be CC'd to our school district email as well? How is that communication flow going to work?
I believe that they will only be going to your OSBA email address. I'd have to check with Linnell and our IT team to see if it's feasible to copy other email addresses, but my guess is no, that you're going to have to just check the OSBA email account.
And so it's each one of us needs to reach out to Linnell to set that up, or is that just going to be set up for everyone? Because apparently we all need one to be using.
We are still leaving it up to individual board members to make the decision about whether to use an OSBA email account. We are strongly recommending it, but that's why we're leaving it up to you to reach out to Linnell to ask for one and not requiring it this time. We might in the future require it, but right now we're just strongly recommending it.
Okay, thank you.
And Christy, to your previous point about the deliberations and sending out something, a piece of information, an article about something you might be discussing, there's new language that was in House Bill 2805 as well that specifically talks about just conveying information, and that would be okay. It's the deliberation and the sharing, the the sharing and creating a conversation that is the issue. So great question.
Yeah. And I
Okay,
will be
thanks.
talking about those new exceptions here in a minute too. Okay, deliberation has also been now newly defined discussion or communication that is part of a decision-making process. And then the OSBA bylaws actually define quorum. We already talked about what that is here on the OSBA board, but that is 12 of 23 currently because we have all 23 positions filled. Not a meeting. This is not new information. It is not a meeting if you are doing an on-site inspection of any project or program. If you attend any sort of national, regional, or state association meeting. So if you travel to NSBA with a quorum, or if you go to the OSBA annual convention as a quorum, that's not necessarily a meeting unless you get a quorum together and start talking about OSBA business. But if you're just in attendance together, that is not a meeting. You also are also able to have social gatherings that are not a meeting, just as long as the same rules apply, that you're not deliberating or discussing OSBA business at that social gathering with a quorum. And so here are the new exceptions that Spencer just referenced. Any kind of communications that are purely factual, which is the question that was just asked, or educational in nature, and that convey no deliberation or decision on any matter that might reasonably come before the board, the governing body. That is not a public meeting that you need to worry about. If it's not related to any matter that at any time could reasonably be foreseen to come before the governing body for deliberation and decision, the public meeting law does not apply to that. So for example, if a quorum of the board were to get together and start talking about who they want to be the governor of Oregon, that's not going to be business that's ever going to become before the OSBA board. So that's fine to have a conversation about that. And then finally, non-substantive in nature, such as communication relating to scheduling, leaves of absence, and other similar matters. So you can have a quorum of the board talking about those scheduling issues and leaves of absences and those types of kind of administrative type matters. Public meeting requirements. I'm going to briefly go through location notice and minute recording requirements. These are not new. So the location must be within the geographic boundaries of the area over which the public body has jurisdiction. So any location in Oregon for OSBA would be within the jurisdiction because we have the jurisdiction of the entire state. You need to make sure that your location ensures ADA accessibility. Remote access. This is a relatively new, it wasn't last session. I want to say maybe 2021. I can't remember exactly, but relatively new. So some people are not aware of this yet. There is a law that says to extent reasonably possible, public bodies must make all meetings, excluding executive sessions, accessible remotely through technological means and provide opportunity for members of general public to remotely submit oral and written testimony if in-person oral and written testimony is allowed. OSBA board doesn't typically have any sort of public comment period that would apply to, but if you've noticed in recent times when we have in-person OSBA board meetings, we have a remote access, and it's because of the statute that requires public entities to have that. So that's not something that you're doing on your local board. You know, don't despair. You can reach out to us, and I have contact information at the end. If anything I say today causes questions for you about, oh, our local board isn't doing that, I would advise against putting that in the chat and reach out to the legal team at OSBA, and we can help you work through any of those questions that pertain to your local board. If it's pertains to the OSBA board, feel free to reach directly out to me, and I will have the contact information at the end for reaching out for those legal questions. Notice, you have to notice public meetings, and they must be reasonably calculated to provide actual notice to interested persons. 192-641 requires a notice for meetings which are open to all members of the public to contain at minimum the following information: the time of the meeting, the place of the meeting, and the principal subjects anticipated to be considered at the meeting. So you can add subjects. I always recommend that you try to have your agenda as fleshed out as possible in advance and not to surprise people if you add things at the last minute, that's where the complaints about whether or not you followed the notice requirements start rolling in. So just trying to be as prepared as possible for your meetings. But there is some flexibility in there that allows you to add agenda items if they weren't contemplated in advance of the meeting. The agenda, like I said before, must be reasonably calculated to provide actual notice to interested persons. Timing of notice. So this is the legal requirement that applies to your local boards. The OSBA bylaws stipulate a little bit different timing, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But for regular meetings under the public meeting law, you have to notice those within a reasonable amount of time. Special meetings is at least 24 hours in advance. And then there is this opportunity for an emergency meeting. But what I would say about emergency meetings is that you should probably be consulting with legal counsel if you're going to have an emergency meeting, just to make sure that it qualifies as an actual emergency. We have boards that are meeting and calling them emergency meetings, and they may not meet the statutory requirement of emergency meeting. So I would just check with legal counsel unless it's, a clear emergency, like your, a school building just burned down and you need to authorize a contract immediately or something like that. That would be an emergency. So I mentioned the OSBA board has a different set of requirements, and that comes from the bylaws. And so that requires at least 48 hours prior notice of a meeting. So unlike the public meeting law and the law that applies to your local boards, OSBA has to give 48 hours rather than 24 hours notice. So there's a little bit more notice required under the OSBA bylaws. Public meeting minutes. Every public meeting, you have to take minutes, and they need to be a true reflection of the matters discussed at the meeting and the views of the participant. All minutes or recordings must be available to the public within a reasonable time after the meeting. And public meeting minutes are public records and need to be retained for a specific period of time. The OSBA has a record retention schedule, and the meeting minutes are listed on that retention schedule. I can't remember off the top of my head how long we keep them. But we have a retention schedule, and of course your local boards have a retention schedule for those items as well. What about committees and subcommittees? And this, whenever I do this presentation and talk about committees and subcommittees and inform the attendees that committees and subcommittees must comply with these public meeting laws that I just went over, including minutes and notice and all of those things that we just went through, I get lots of questions about, well, I've got this group that gets together. Is this a committee? Is this a subcommittee? Is it an advisory committee? Are we supposed to be taking minutes? Are we supposed to be noticing this? If, like I said, if you have any questions about what you're doing on your local board, I will have contact information at the end for you to reach out to our OSBA legal department and ask those questions. If you are on a committee or subcommittee or advisory committee of the OSBA board, and you are not sure whether or not your committee has been following the public meeting laws that I've just gone through, please reach out to me directly and we can figure that out with you. I know that Linnell and I have been working pretty closely trying to get all of that under control, and everybody taking minutes and noticing their meetings. So just reach out if you have any questions or concerns about any of the committees or subcommittees of the OSBA board you're surveying on. Public meeting violations. So I don't like to talk about what could possibly happen, but I think it's a good idea for everyone to just be aware of what can happen when you're not following the public meeting laws. And there's some new requirements that kind of came out of 2023 that you should be aware of. So if somebody is aggrieved, they believe that a public official, a board member has violated the public meeting law, they can now, which is new, file a complaint with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. They can also file a lawsuit about that, and that has been an option for years previously. That's not new. So under this new grievance process, the person who believes that a board member has violated a public meeting law within 30 days of the alleged violation can file a written grievance with the public body. So if you're serving on your local board This could be a community member that would file a complaint about the violation with the district that you serve on. If it's the OSBA board and somebody believes that the OSBA board has committed some sort of public meeting violation, they would file that with OSBA. And once that complaint is received by the district or OSBA, you have 21 days from receipt to provide a written response. And that written response has to be copied to the OGEC. So the OGEC will get a copy of your response to that complaint. If the public body does not timely respond, or if the complainant isn't satisfied, they can file a complaint with the OGEC, and the OGEC may investigate public meeting violation complaints. So previous to this year, OGEC only had authority over executive session violations. Now they have authority over all public meeting violations. So they've actually hired quite a few, or are in the process of hiring quite a few new staff, because this is a huge responsibility that has been bestowed upon them by the legislature. So if OGEC finds that the governing body violated public meeting laws, they can impose civil penalties not to exceed $1,000. And this is personal liability to the board members themselves. So it's very, very important that board members be aware of these laws I'm talking about, so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they're having to pay $1,000 fine. So if a lawsuit is filed, a court can order the public entity to redo the decision, provide equitable, that's supposed to say equitable relief, not belief. And they can require the payment of the plaintiff's reasonable attorney fees. So if the complainant files a lawsuit, they can actually order the board member personally to reimburse the plaintiff for their attorney fees. So with all of these new requirements and OGE's authority over the public meeting laws now, and this new avenue for people to complain about public meeting violations, there's also an annual training, not an annual, a per term training requirement. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so sorry about that. So there is this annual training requirement, and this training that we're doing, we're actually going to submit to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission and see if we can get approval so that this meets the legal requirement for OSBA board members to meet this new legal requirement. But you're also going to have to do training through your local board to meet this requirement. And so the OSBA staff will be designing training that we will offer virtually via webinar. And right now we are currently scheduled to do that in July. So hopefully OGEC will approve our training. And once you all attend that in July, hopefully, and this training itself, hopefully that will meet that annual requirement. And you won't have to do that again. But we do plan to offer this probably several times a year going forward to make sure that all of our OSBA board members and all of our OSBA members in general can meet this new OGEC mandatory training requirement. Okay, so moving on to executive sessions briefly. So any meeting or part of a meeting which is closed to certain persons for deliberation on certain matters is an executive session. And as most of you know, this is not new. None of this is new. The vote has to take place in open session, except for very limited circumstances. So if you have an executive session, you have to have an open session to take a vote afterwards. And these are some of the reasons that you can go into an executive session: employee dismissal, discipline and complaints, labor negotiations, real property transactions, consult with an attorney regarding pending or threatened litigation, evaluation of an employee performance. So there were a couple new topics added last session, but I think the lawyers that have been advising on executive session topics would have said that these types of things probably could have been discussed in executive session prior to 2023, but now it's really clear in the law. So you can meet an executive session to consider matters related to the safety of the governing body and of a public body, staff and volunteers, and the security of public body facilities and meeting spaces. And you can also meet an executive session to consider matters relating to cybersecurity infrastructure and responses to cybersecurity threats. And unfortunately, we've been seeing an increase in those cybersecurity threats to school districts. So that's unfortunate. What about the media? This is another one that comes up quite a bit. So the media can attend executive sessions, except for in very limited circumstances. And the question that we get most often is, who is media? How is that defined? And there is some helpful guidance in the Oregon, in the Department of Justice manual. So we do walk districts through that when that happens. This has not been a question yet on the OSBA board, but it could be in the future. So if you ever have questions about, who is media, can this person attend our executive session, please feel free to reach out to our legal department and they can help you work through that issue, because we do get that question quite a bit now. Executive session violations. Again, civil penalties up to $1,000, similar to the public meeting violations. Lawsuits against the district can result, just like with public meeting violations. And then this final piece of legislation that came out last year is interesting. It allows the OGEC to review and investigate on its own public meeting violations. So for example, if OGEC staff member read in the paper something and it sounded like maybe a board violated the public meeting law, they could initiate an investigation on their own with nobody filing a complaint. I've talked to the executive director of OGEC, and it sounds like that's not their intent, that they don't have capacity to start, policing boards without a complaint being filed, but that they do have the legal authority to do so now after last session. And I mentioned the Oregon Attorney General's Public Record and Meetings Manual. This is a great resource. So if you have questions about public records or public meetings, it answers just about every single question you could possibly have. It's usually the first place that the attorneys go to answer questions that we get from members. So if you're interested, or you could just reach out to us and we'll find it for you in the manual. And like I said, if you have any questions about OSBA's compliance with the public meeting laws, any committees, advisory committees, caucuses you serve on, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me directly at hpurcell@osba.org. If you have any questions that have come to mind while you're listening to this tonight, either about public meetings, public records, or ethics, you can reach out to our legal team at pacelegal@osba.org. And this is a list of the attorneys in our legal department. They're there and happy to answer your questions. So please reach out to them if you have any questions. And how are we doing? That's the end of my content. And looks like there's lots of chatter in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Haley. I think lots of those questions has been answered. Thank you, Spencer, for fielding them. Haley, I'm going to, and I want to just first of all say thank you. Like literally, you're losing your voice doing this work for OSBA. So really appreciate your work. I'm going to ask you a question. Board members may have seen different emails, Pace Legal or pre-loss. Are they interchangeable? Should a board member or an OSBA board member, when they refer people to OSBA, should they think which email to use for what, or are they interchangeable?
So I think there's 3, and Michael, I think just reviewed this. I think there are like 2 or 3 email addresses that do work and they all funnel to the same place. So Michael, do you have more information on that?
Correct. The official kind of new email address is pacelegal@osba.org, but all the other emails that were already out there, like pre-loss, etc., they all funnel to that email, so it will work. So whatever they already have will work, and then it goes to all the lawyers in the legal department. So we see that message come in, and then whoever is kind of on the shift at that time then responds to that email.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that, Michael. Haley, as the Chief Legal Officer for OSB Interim Deputy Executive Director, you've been doing phenomenal work. I look forward as a upcoming colleague representing the other COSA, which is the Council of School Attorneys nationally, being the chair of that council, sitting on the National School Board Association board in a time where the public education is being examined, challenged in the courts. It's a huge responsibility, and we're very privileged and honored to have you representing not only OSBA and Oregon, but nationally supporting schools through that capacity. I want to just say thank you, thank you, thank you for stepping up in every opportunity. And thank you for this phenomenal presentation. And thank you for your team as well, including Michael. Thank you for stepping up for Haley's position in these times.
Thank you, Mr. President. I look forward to the NSBA board with you as well.
It's going to be exciting. So, Emily, I want to give you an opportunity to give any remarks and reflection. I'm very thankful for this wealth of information. I'm sure it's added lots of questions or some questions to some of us who are watching live or who are going to be reviewing the recording. Please send those if you have any, and hoping that this presentation added some information for us or reminders for us about the roles and responsibilities as board members and the roles of OSBA staff and as an organization. So use it as a reference. And Emily, you want to take it with any notes or remarks?
I just wanted to say thank you all for coming tonight and taking the time to take in this information. I know it was a lot. We haven't done anything like this in a while, and so we were trying to cram it all in while we had you here. So just really appreciate you sticking with us tonight, and appreciate the team. Linnell did a ton of work on this on the back end to get us ready for this. So just appreciate that. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the PowerPoint and all of the links that we kind of moved around to are in the agenda. So you should have that there. We're really trying to move things to away from paper so that it can be easily updated. You have the most current and up-to-date information through our portal and the website. And we'll encourage the board members who weren't able to attend to watch the training and the recording of that. So there will be a follow-up email with all of that information.
Thank you, Emily. I want to say staff who have been sticking around until about 8 o'clock on a Friday, thank you for spending the time. I don't want to be the reason to delay you a single moment extra between you and your families. And same for the board members. Just want to say we cannot claim that we achieved the board goal of professional development and onboarding with one presentation. It's going to be an ongoing process. It is our individual and collective responsibility to reach out with questions. So please do. And for us to review the material whenever we have questions. So it is going to be an ongoing process for all of us. Make sure that you check in whenever you have questions. And without further ado, if there's no further business in front of the board, we are adjourned. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Have a good night.
Everyone.